If you've been following along, we are currently in the middle of covering a month-long trip to the Florida Keys. Since we're almost halfway through that trip, not quite, but almost, I thought I would just kind of give a short recap in case you haven't kind of seen what we're doing. So this footage is from the October-November timeframe. We got an Airbnb for 1 month in Islamorada in the Florida Keys. We have always wanted to relocate and move to the Florida Keys, but a lot of people do. A lot of people think they do, and then they get here and it's not exactly what they thought it would be. There's no Target, there's not a lot of restaurants open late, you're farther away from things. It's a very small town. So we just wanted to make sure that this was something that we wanted and something that we could commit to long term. So far you've seen us move in, we've tried some new restaurants. Of course, we went to the breweries. That's always our favorite thing. And that was our very first stop when we got here. You saw that too. We also made it to Bahia Honda State Park. We've explored new things like feeding the tarpon at Robbie's. So far I've covered all of that, and I will link those videos in the description if you're interested in going back and seeing them. So I just thought I would also mention that this trip was kind of work and kind of not. Well, we weren't here for work, but what I mean by that is we tried to keep it as close to like real life as we could. So I did work some of the time. I was off during this stretch, so the videos that I've already posted and then the video I'm posting today, I hadn't worked. And that was about 10 days off that I was able to take. So I was not working. And then I worked like 2 or 3 days a week for the remainder of our time. So I wanted to get a sense of what it would feel like to work while we were here. But then once we got here, I kind of changed my mind about that and just kind of wanted to immerse myself in the Florida Keys. So you can do with that information what you will. Maybe it's relatable, maybe it's not, I have no idea, but it's just the truth of like what our experience was during this month-long trip. And I think it's important to note that, you know, it would be harder to cover a lot of the things that I'm covering in these videos had I been working, you know, all day long. So I think it's helpful to know that that we had a full day to do a lot of these adventures. It wasn't things that we were trying to squeeze in after work and that sort of thing. So just so you know, that's kind of what the work structure looked like when we were down here. Today's video is going to cover a couple of days, but the majority of it was Monday. So then like the Tuesday I also had off, but then Wednesday I went back to work. So the majority of this video is Monday. Tuesday we had errands to run to prepare for, going back to work, and then work days there's not as much to report. It's just not as exciting. So like I said, this was a Monday and we had really wanted to take the kayaks out. We hadn't been able to do that yet. And this was like right around day 10 of the trip, somewhere in there. So we were kind of bummed that we had not taken the kayaks out, and that's what we were gonna do on this day. Unfortunately, it rained on and off all day. It was not a good kayak day. And we ran into that quite a bit during our month-long trip. And in the Florida Keys, it's super normal to have like 10 minutes of like really hard rain and then it stops. And that was not the rain that we experienced on this trip. It was like several days of like all day rain, which is fine. I love the rain, but it did impact our plans for this Monday of today's video. We didn't get to kayak, but what we did instead is we went to the History of Diving Museum in Islamorada.
The History of Diving Museum is appropriately named because it's exactly what it sounds like. It's all about the history of diving. It was a very eye-opening museum, and I really think that I've taken for granted how we came to be able to go diving, honestly. It's something that I don't even know that I've ever thought about before this museum. So there's a long history of diving in the Florida Keys, especially because there's been so many shipwrecks along the coral reef. So after a shipwreck, treasure hunters would try to recover the treasure, and while I knew this, I didn't think about the fact that many years ago, they were doing this without the equipment we have today. This museum put into perspective how amazing of a feat this really used to be. One of my favorite parts of the museum was that they have a 70-pound bar of silver that was recovered from a 16th century shipwreck. It's actually in an interactive exhibit, so you can try to lift it, and this really adds to the amazement that people used to dive for things like this and carry them up without the modern diving equipment that we have now. It's just so crazy how this helped to put that into perspective. So the diving museum starts in the 1400s and goes all the way through present day. So you get to see all of the changes and all of the ways that things have gotten so much better through the years. The diving museum also has diving gear from all corners of the globe and all points in diving history. There's artifacts ranging from some coins to actual treasure chests, things like that. This museum is extensive, and I couldn't believe how much information was there, as well as how many artifacts they had. If you've ever been interested in learning more about diving, you will truly not find a better place than the diving museum in Islamorada. We don't have kids, so I can't personally speak for whether this would be a good museum for them or not. I personally feel like they might get bored, but I do think that depends on a lot of factors like their age, what they're interested in, and how long the adults in the party take to look through the museum. They do have a little treasure hunt within the museum where there's some diving figurines hidden throughout the displays. So you try to count as many as you can, and then at the end you report how many you saw and you can get a prize.
It takes some time, even though it's just a smile, but I hate it when I'm faking. With you all night in a body that ain't mine, thinking I am gonna burst. You and I are falling behind, and I'm ready to go get out while we're whole. Now take my advice, take my advice.
We went to Wahoos for the first time after the diving museum. It is located right on the water, so it has incredible views. Stay tuned for an upcoming video on Curry Hammock State Park, because in that video we go to Wahoos again, except that day the sun was out, and the views of the water from Wahoos when the sun is out is insane. It is so beautiful, and it's pretty on this day too, but just trust me, when the sun is out, it is just out of this world. An honest review is that the food is kind of just okay, but they have a really large bar area and the bar overlooks the water, so I highly recommend coming for a drink and checking out those incredible views. And obviously, we went back again, like I just mentioned, so it's definitely a worthwhile visit. But yeah, the food isn't anything spectacular in my opinion. The next day was my last day off before going back to work. We finally got to take the kayaks out, but not for very long because the weather conditions weren't perfect. Well, that's not true. The weather was great. It was just still pretty rocky. So we just didn't get to stay out as long as we would have wanted to, but we were stoked to finally get out. Then we got some coffee and took our girl to the dog park and did some boring stuff that's not really YouTube worthy, like getting groceries and that sort of thing. That wraps up today's Florida Keys video in Islamorada. Next time we're headed a little further south, so if you've ever been interested in Big Pine Key, you'll want to make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss it. See you next time.